The sun was dipping low over the city, painting the streets in golden light. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening for Manny Pacquiao. No flashing cameras, no reporters chasing him, no security detail following behind. Just a quiet walk. After a long meeting, enjoying a rare moment of peace, he wore a simple shirt, dark jeans, and a cap pulled low over his eyes. To most people, he looked like any other man. And that was exactly what Manny liked. Despite being a boxing legend and a political leader, his heart always longed for simplicity. But on this street, simplicity became something else. A police officer, standing near a corner, noticed him lingering by a shop window. The officer's eyes narrowed. He didn't see a world champion or a senator. He only saw a man who looked out of place. "Hey, you!" the officer barked, stepping forward. "Move along! Don't just stand there like that." Manny blinked, surprised at the tone. He gave a polite nod and shifted slightly, but the officer wasn't done. "What's in your bag? You can't just hang around here," the officer continued, his voice rising. People nearby began to glance over, curious. Manny opened his mouth gently. "Sir, I'm not causing trouble. I'm just waiting for a ride." But the officer crossed his arms, shaking his head. "Doesn't matter. This isn't a place for loitering. Go somewhere else." For a moment, the great champion of the ring stood silently, his eyes calm but steady. He could have revealed himself instantly. He could have raised his voice, demanded respect, but he didn't. Instead, he simply bowed his head slightly, showing humility. And that humility made the scene even more powerful, because people around started whispering, "Wait, is that who I think it is? That looks like Manny Pacquiao?" Phones were coming out, cameras starting to record. The officer, still unaware of who stood in front of him, pressed on. "Don't make me ask again." Manny's lips curved into bye, the faintest smile, but his silence spoke volumes. The stage was set, the tension growing. No one knew yet. But what was about to unfold would leave the entire street stunned. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. Some people squinted, tilting their heads, unsure if their eyes were playing tricks on them. "That really looks like Manny Pacquiao," one teenager whispered, already holding up his phone to record. But the officer either didn't hear or didn't care. His focus stayed locked on the man he thought was just another ordinary passerby. "I've asked you twice already," the officer snapped, stepping closer. His tone was sharp, dismissive. "Show me your ID. Let's see if you're even supposed to be around here." Manny's calm demeanor didn't change. Slowly, he reached into his pocket, careful not to move suddenly, and pulled out his wallet. His movements were respectful, even when respect wasn't being given to him. But before he could hand it over, the officer waved his hand impatiently. "Forget it. Just step aside. People like you shouldn't hang around this neighborhood." The words landed like a slap. A few gasps rose from the onlookers. "People like you?" someone muttered angrily. One man in the crowd finally spoke up. "Do you even know who you're talking to? That's Senator Manny Pacquiao." The officer let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, right. Manny Pacquiao? Out here dressed like that? Don't be ridiculous. The senator would never walk these streets without security." But the more he mocked, the more curious the crowd became. People pressed closer, trying to catch a better look at the man under the cap. Some whispered excitedly, others looked outraged. The tension was thick in the air. Still, Manny remained calm. He didn't raise his voice, didn't flash his political title or boxing glory. Instead, he offered a gentle reply. "Officer, I'm not here to cause any harm. I just want to wait in peace." But humility sometimes makes arrogance stand out even more. The officer scoffed. "Don't play games with me. I've dealt with plenty of guys like you who think they're above the rules." The crowd stirred. Manny's quiet strength was beginning to inspire them. They could see the contrast. A man of power and fame showing patience, while the one in uniform showed none. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mama, that is Manny Pacquiao. I've seen him on TV." More heads nodded. The whispers turned into certainty. Cameras flashed, and video clips were already spreading across social media. But the officer still didn't get it. "All right, that's enough. If you don't move along, I'll have to escort you out myself." Manny glanced at the crowd, then back at the officer. He could feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see how he would react. And in that moment, Manny made a choice, not to defend himself with anger, but to let his humility reveal the truth, in its own time. The stage was set, the storm was building, and soon, the officer's arrogance would collide with a truth he could no longer ignore. By now, the street was buzzing. Cars slowed down, passengers peering through windows, curious about the growing commotion. Dozens of phones were pointed in one direction, capturing every second. The videos were already streaming live, reaching thousands of viewers within minutes, and still, the officer stood with his arms crossed, glaring at Manny. "Sir, this is the last time I'll say it. Move along before I have to make you." His words dripped with authority, but his eyes betrayed irritation, like he wanted to make an example of this nobody, but the crowd wasn't having it. "That's not a nobody!" a man shouted from the back. "That's Manny Pacquiao! Show some respect!" The officer's jaw tightened. He let out a scoffing laugh. "Pacquiao, please. The senator doesn't just walk around like this. Don't believe everything you see." But the truth was harder to deny with every passing second. Manny gently lifted his cap, revealing his unmistakable face. The gasps were immediate. The crowd surged forward slightly, people pointing, murmuring, some even cheering. "It is him!" a woman cried out, her voice trembling with excitement. "That's Manny Pacquiao!" The officer's smug smile wavered. He blinked, leaning in closer, his confidence cracking. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down. "If you really are Manny Pacquiao, then prove it. Why would a senator be standing on this street dressed like that?" Manny's answer was simple, yet powerful. He looked directly at the officer and said, "Because I don't need luxury to remind me of who I am. I came from streets just like these, and I never forgot them." The crowd erupted in applause. Cheers rang out. The officer shifted uncomfortably, realizing that control of the situation was slipping from his hands. But Manny wasn't finished. He turned slightly, addressing the onlookers. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. "Respect should not come from titles or clothes. It should come from how we treat each other. Even if I were just a regular man standing here, I would deserve kindness." The silence that followed was powerful. The words sank deep into everyone's hearts, even those who had only stopped out of curiosity. But the officer? His face flushed red. Embarrassment burned in his eyes. He had humiliated himself in front of a growing crowd, and yet his pride wouldn't let him back down. He muttered, "All right, enough speeches. Let's not make this a scene." But it was already too late. The scene was happening. People were shouting back at him now. "You disrespected him. You should apologize. Do you even know who you're talking to?" The officer's authority was collapsing, his words drowned by a wave of voices rising in defense of Manny Pacquiao. Through it all, Manny stayed grounded. No anger, no arrogance, only patience. That quiet dignity made the contrast even clearer. One man in uniform misusing power, and another, a true champion, showing what real power looked like. The moment was no longer about just one insult. It was becoming bigger. It was about justice, humility, and how one man's character could shine, brightest when tested in the harshest of ways. And in that moment, everyone knew something unforgettable was about to happen. The air felt heavy now. The once busy street had transformed into a stage, with Manny Pacquiao at its center. The officer stood stiff, his jaw tight, his authority unraveling under the eyes, and the cameras, of dozens of people. For Manny, the situation wasn't about ego. He could have walked away, but the way the officer had spoken to him, dismissive, humiliating, as if he were beneath dignity, struck a nerve. Not because he was Manny Pacquiao, world champion and senator, but because he knew there were countless others who faced the same treatment every single day without the power to speak back. The crowd's energy shifted. People weren't just defending Manny because he was a legend. They were defending him because his calm strength reminded them of justice, of fairness, of something bigger. "Officer," Manny said firmly, but without anger, "this isn't about me. It's about the way you treat people. Would you have spoken the same way to an elderly man? To a worker heading home? To a poor child on this street? The officer swallowed hard, his throat visibly tight. The questions cut deeper than he expected. His voice faltered. I was just doing my job, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Doing your job doesn't mean humiliating people, someone shouted. You disrespected him for no reason. Another added. The officer looked around, feeling the ground slip beneath him. The phone's recording, the shouts, the unwavering gaze of Manny Pacquiao, it all became too much. He straightened, puffing his chest out again, trying to salvage control. All right, everyone calm down. Let's not escalate this. But Manny raised a hand gently, stopping both the crowd and the officer with nothing more than his presence. His voice carried the quiet command of someone who had been in rings, in Senate halls, and in the toughest streets of life. Escalation is not what I want. Respect is. The officer's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, it seemed like he might argue back. But then, another twist came. From the edge of the crowd, a young boy ran forward carrying a worn-out boxing glove. His eyes were wide with awe as he looked up at Manny. Sir Manny, can you sign this? Please? The officer froze. The entire crowd went silent. The boy's innocent request shattered any lingering doubt about Manny's identity. Who else would a child on the street beg for an autograph like that? Manny smiled warmly, crouched down, and took the glove. He signed it carefully, patting the boy on the shoulder. Work hard, study harder, and always be kind. That's how you'll be a real champion. The crowd erupted in cheers. Phones zoomed in, capturing every second. The officer's shoulders slumped, his arrogance crumbling completely. There was no denying it now, and yet, the humiliation he had intended for Manny had circled back on him. He wasn't the one in control anymore. He was the one exposed, the one the crowd would remember, for disrespecting a national hero. Slowly, reluctantly, he spoke. Senator Pacquiao? I didn't realize. I apologize. But Manny didn't smile triumphantly. He didn't gloat. He simply nodded and said, apology accepted. But remember, never judge a man by what he wears or where he stands. Judge him by his heart. Those words landed heavier than any punch Manny had ever thrown. The officer looked down, humbled. The crowd clapped and cheered, not just for Manny's victory, but for his grace. This was the true measure of greatness, the ability to rise above humiliation and turn it into a lesson for everyone watching. And still, as the noise filled the street, everyone had the same thought. This story was far from over. Something, even more surprising, was about to unfold. The street had become electric. People who minutes ago were just passing by now stood shoulder to shoulder, their cameras raised high, documenting everything. Manny Pacquiao, once disrespected and dismissed, was now standing tall, not through force, but through humility. And the police officer? He looked like a man whose own authority had collapsed in his hands. But the story was just beginning to ripple outward. A woman in the crowd, holding her phone tightly, shouted, "This is going live right now! The world needs to see how even heroes are treated unfairly." Her live stream was already climbing in viewers, comments flooding in as people across the internet tuned in to witness the drama. The officer noticed, his face paling. He hadn't just picked on a random man. He had picked on someone whose very presence commanded respect far beyond this street. The idea that thousands, maybe millions, were already watching filled him with panic. Manny, however, remained calm. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small handkerchief, and dabbed the sweat from his forehead. It wasn't from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He wasn't just handling an insult. He was carrying the responsibility of everyone who had ever been belittled, disrespected, or made to feel invisible. "You see?" Manny said, turning slightly to address the crowd. "This isn't about me. It's about how easily someone can use power to make another person feel small. But you don't have to be rich, famous, or powerful to deserve respect. Respect is a right." The cheers that erupted shook the officer to his core, and then another twist. From behind the police car, a senior officer appeared, a captain. his polished shoes tapping against the pavement. He had been called in by a concerned bystander who feared the situation was spiraling out of control. The crowd parted as he walked forward, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. "What's going on here?" the captain demanded. The first officer straightened instantly, trying to recover his composure. "Just handling a situation, sir." This man was... But before he could finish, a voice from the crowd cut through the air. "Do you know who that man is? That's Manny Pacquiao." The captain's head turned sharply. His eyes widened as recognition set in. He took a step closer, his tone shifting immediately. "Senator Pacquiao, sir, I apologize deeply for whatever happened here." The first officer looked like the ground might swallow him whole. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, that the man he had insulted was not only a boxing legend, but also a respected senator. The captain removed his cap, bowing slightly. "Sir, please forgive this misunderstanding. It won't happen again." Manny didn't move, didn't gloat. His silence carried more weight than any angry outburst could. The crowd leaned in, waiting to see how he would respond. Finally, Manny spoke. "Forgiveness is easy, but change is what matters." He gestured toward the officer. "Train your men to see people, not just uniforms. Authority is not about power, it's about service." The crowd roared with applause, their chants rising. "Manny! Manny! Manny!" Phones kept recording, live streams kept buzzing, and in real time the world was watching a public lesson in humility, grace, and true leadership. The captain nodded gravely. "You have my word, Senator." The humiliated officer could only stand in silence, his earlier arrogance reduced to nothing. But deep down, he knew he'd been given something rare. Not just forgiveness, but an example of dignity he would never forget. And as the sun dipped lower, the story was far from over. The videos being shared would soon explode online, reaching corners of the globe neither Manny nor the officer could have imagined. By the time Manny Pacquiao walked away from the crowd that evening, the encounter already had a life of its own. Within minutes, clips of the officer disrespecting him and Manny's calm, powerful response were flooding social media. On Twitter, hashtags like Aubsar Respect Pacquiao and Balsar Justice on the Street began trending. Facebook was filled with shares of live streams, with captions like, "Humility beats arrogance every time," and "This is why Manny Pacquiao will always be a champion." By the time Manny reached his car, his phone buzzed nonstop. Jinky, his wife, called first. "Manny, what happened? I'm seeing you everywhere." He sighed softly. "It was just one man forgetting what respect means." "But now the whole world is talking about it," Jinky replied. "Do you know how many people are inspired by what you said?" In the Philippines, major TV channels were already running the story, showing Manny's calm speech replayed again and again. Anchors praised his ability to stay composed under pressure, highlighting that even outside the ring, Pacquiao had proven himself a true fighter for dignity and respect. In the US, late-night hosts and commentators debated the footage. Some criticized the officer harshly, while others marveled at Manny's ability to handle humiliation without anger. "Imagine being so calm," one commentator said, "that instead of lashing out, you turn the moment into a life lesson for the entire world." In Europe and Asia, online forums lit up. Chess players, athletes, politicians, people from all walks of life were posting clips with their own reflections. Many drew parallels to their own struggles, times they were underestimated, judged, or disrespected, and how they wished they had handled it with the same grace. Meanwhile, the officer at the center of it all found himself drowning in a tidal wave of criticism. His name, though blurred in many videos, was quickly identified. His social media accounts were bombarded with comments, most harsh, some demanding accountability, and a few urging compassion. At first, he wanted to defend himself. But the more he replayed the video, the more he realized the truth. His behavior was inexcusable. That night, sitting alone in his apartment, he saw one clip that shook him more than all the rest. It wasn't Manny's words. It wasn't the crowd. It was a child, maybe 8 years old, watching the video on TikTok and saying, Why was the policeman so mean? The man was so kind. The officer turned off his phone, buried his face in his hands, and for the first time in years, truly felt the weight of what his uniform should mean. Interestingly, Manny himself didn't post about the incident. He didn't release a statement. He didn't seek attention. He simply went home, had dinner with his family, and prayed quietly that night, asking for guidance. But his silence only made the world talk more. Commentators praised his humility, saying that his refusal to fan the flames proved his integrity. Even further, one popular YouTube channel summed it up perfectly. True power isn't about fighting back. It's about knowing when to stay calm. Manny Pacquiao just schooled us all, without throwing a single punch. By the next morning, the video had been viewed over 50 million times across platforms. Schools in the Philippines began using it, in classrooms as a lesson in respect. Motivational speakers quoted Manny's words. Even government officials praised the example he had set. The officer, meanwhile, was called in for a disciplinary review. But more importantly, he faced something much harder, living with the reality that the man he tried to humiliate had become the very teacher of his redemption. And for Manny, he carried on with his day as usual, smiling, greeting fans, and quietly reminding everyone who crossed his path, respect costs nothing, but it can change everything. A week later, the same city street where the incident had unfolded was strangely quiet. Vendors set up their stalls, children ran by, and passers-by carried on with their routines, but everyone remembered what had happened there. The memory of Manny Pacquiao's calm dignity still lingered in the air. The police department, after days of public outcry, announced that the officer involved had been disciplined. But something unexpected also happened. The officer himself had requested to see Manny in person, not to argue, not to defend himself, but to apologize. When Manny arrived at the arranged meeting spot, the officer was already there. Gone was the arrogance, the condescending tone, and the smugness. Instead, he stood stiffly, eyes lowered, clutching his cap nervously. "Senator Pacquiao," he said, his voice breaking slightly, "I want to apologize for how I treated you. I disrespected you as a man, as a public servant, and as a symbol of hope to so many. I forgot what this uniform stands for." For a moment, Manny said nothing. He simply studied the man in front of him. The crowd that had gathered leaned in, waiting for his reaction. Finally, Manny spoke, his voice steady but gentle. "We all make mistakes. What matters is whether we learn from them. You carry a badge. That means you carry the trust of the people. Don't ever forget that again." The officer's eyes welled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak, and extended his hand. Slowly, Manny shook it. The crowd erupted into applause. Some recorded the moment, others simply wiped their eyes, touched by the scene of forgiveness unfolding before them. Manny then turned to the onlookers. "Respect isn't just for the famous or the powerful. Every person deserves it, whether they're rich or poor, known or unknown. If we live by that, our world will be better." The officer was reinstated, but with stricter oversight and new training. More importantly, he carried with him the humility of being forgiven by the very man he humiliated. For him, it was no longer about wearing a badge, it was about living up to it. As for Manny, he never mentioned the incident again. He didn't need to. His actions had already spoken louder than any press release or speech ever could. Around the world, the story became more than just a viral video. It became a parable about respect, humility, and second chances. Teachers quoted it. Pastors preached it. Parents told it to their children. As Manny walked away that day, someone in the crowd shouted, "Champ! Why didn't you just put him in his place that first day?" Manny turned, smiled, and said, "Because sometimes the best way to win is not to fight." And with that, he waved, climbed into his car, and disappeared into the busy streets, leaving behind a lesson the world would not soon forget. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, share it with friends, and don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story might inspire you even more.